Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now Intel's Socket 1700 platform is home to some great CPUs. The Pentium G7400 is ideal for an everyday PC build and it can even play games, provided those games aren't too processor intensive. Working our way up through the ranks and we've got the i3-12100F, which offers excellent performance for the price and is currently one of the best quad-core chips available. If you have an even bigger budget, then something like an i5-12400F or i7-12700 might be just what you're looking for. As you know, I'm always more interested in the entry-level side of things, and having spent some time with the aforementioned Pentium and i3, I wanted to experiment a bit more with these two lower cost offerings. I've said before that the Pentium is good for a Pentium, but it's hard to justify if it's priced quite closely to the i3-12100F where you live. That said, I couldn't help but wonder how things would differ if our setup was a little more mismatched. Today we're going to be pairing the Pentium G7400 with an RTX 3060 Ti and combining the i3-12100F with an RTX 3050 to see how they stack up against each other when the better GPU is paired with the CPU that's weaker and the weaker GPU is paired with the better CPU. Confused for a minute there. This is of course the opposite of what I'd recommend, but I thought it would be fun to see if a higher end graphics card would allow the lower end CPU to outperform its more capable competitor, or whether the CPU bottleneck caused by the 2-core Pentium is simply too severe. I'm going to start off with the results that you might find most surprising. This is Metro Exodus Enhanced. I think that because of the ray tracing, a more powerful GPU is more important here, so the G7400 and 3060 Ti combo wipes the floor with the i3-12100 and 3050, despite the additional processing power of the i3. You'll see as this video goes on that the results tend to swing the other way, in most but not all cases, though Metro here shows the biggest difference by far. It doesn't seem to care about the Pentium's 2 physical cores. I can't say whether or not in other scenarios where ray tracing is present that this would still be the case. I'm sure it wouldn't be, at least not all of the time, but the more GPU power here the better. With that being said, the 0.1% figure is still worse than with the i3 setup because there were 1 or 2 moments when I noticed a little bit of stutter. It wasn't prolonged by any means, there were just 2 moments where the game sort of froze and unfroze in a matter of milliseconds, but it was noticeable and served as a precursor to the following gameplay test. Cyberpunk is far more dependent on CPU power, so the i3 and 3050 combo did far better in terms of an average and the percentile lows. In emptier areas, like here for example, the G7400 held up just fine, and because of the 3060 Ti's extra power, this system as a whole exhibited better results. Very briefly, but when we made our way towards Night City and the people and cars started filling up the screen, it was game over for the 2-core 4-thread Pentium G7400. Turning crowd density down will probably help a bit with this CPU, but the percentile lows will still be far from consistent, meaning that the gameplay will be far from consistent. Don't get me wrong, the Pentium is still a decent choice, just not for anyone wanting to play the most current AAA games with a solid frame rate. It was to be expected really, but as the first result shows, that isn't always the case. Forza Horizon 5 followed in the footsteps of Metro Exodus a little bit. The average frame rate was better with the Pentium and the 3060 Ti combo, but ultimately we were let down once again by the 1 and 0.1% figures, which reflect the stutter and frame dips that were present here. On one occasion, the game even froze and I got a warning related to streaming issues. I can't remember it exactly, but I believe it's to do with the game not being able to stream in the assets fast enough due to the lack of CPU power. So you'll find that cars often just freeze before you get the warning, or the game totally jams altogether and doesn't continue. I've seen a couple of things happen with older CPUs like that. This did only happen once here though. The i3 and 3050 combo did perform worse in terms of an average, but I'd take this lower average any day because it came with a more consistent 1 and 0.1% low. Things were certainly smoother overall here. The game didn't noticeably drop from 75 to 35 FPS and cause me to drive into a wall or a tree or a competing racer without wanting to. It's not completely unplayable on the Pentium, but it is quite unpleasant and unpredictable, which is worse. With Red Dead Redemption 2, the expected order of things was once again restored. The i3 and 3050 combo did better here because the extra cores help in towns like Valentine, where the extra NPCs stress the processor a little bit more. If I had benchmarked this game in the middle of nowhere, the results may have been closer. They definitely would have been, actually. Red Dead is another title that is fairly easygoing with regards to its CPU requirements. I mean, we ran it on an i3 with just one core and hyper-threading enabled not too long ago. It's happy with 4 solid cores or 2 strong ones, like the Golden Cove ones found inside the dual-core G7400. Even the 1.1% lows held up fairly well, and while frame drops are noticeable and you can definitely feel them, there wasn't any sudden stutter or freezing to speak of, so that's always a bonus. Fortnite fell apart with the Pentium. 2 core chips never fare well in my experience, not without performance mode enabled anyway, and with the Pentium G7400 I noticed a few off-putting issues. The average FPS was still great, and the 1% low wasn't even that bad, but the difference between this figure and the 0.1% low indicates performance issues. There was also a noticeable effect, not too dissimilar from when you have a bad internet connection. The game sort of repeats frames and sometimes you're back in the position you were a few steps ago. I have experienced this before with 2 core processors, and I always double check my internet connection when it happens, but it's too much of a coincidence. It only ever tends to happen with 2 core processors like the G7400 here, or just weaker and older CPUs. The i3 and 3050 combo was victorious here and definitely the ideal way to play. Finally then, it's Far Cry 6, and this was a close one with the Pentium G7400 and 3060 Ti combo doing slightly better in terms of an average, but once again faltering from a percentile perspective. Even so, it wasn't an unplayable mess or anything like that. I think because Far Cry 6 is also quite forgiving when it comes to processors. It prefers pure GPU power, though with 2 cores you still won't escape the inevitable FPS drops and stutter that comes with the hardware limitations. Today's results didn't follow the path that I was expecting, and things were definitely a little more mixed and all over the place overall. It's never a good idea to pair a G7400 with a 3060 Ti, but it isn't a bad idea to pair an i3-12100F with a 3050, so I think what we can take away from this is don't blow your budget on a graphics card and hope to pair it with a really entry-level processor, because things won't turn out the way you want them to, especially in those more CPU-intensive games like Cyberpunk. I'm sure none of you were ever going to do that, but it's nice to see how things can differ performance-wise when we mix up the combinations a little bit. If you enjoyed this one, then leave a like down below. Leave a dislike if you didn't. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.